Malik Patterson pulled into the driveway of his newly purchased home, exhaling as he took in the quiet, pristine neighborhood. It was a dream come true, a symbol of years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices. But as he stepped out of his car, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me." A thin, stern-faced woman with short blonde hair stormed across the lawn. Malik barely had time to set his keys in his pocket before she was in front of him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You can't park here," she snapped. "This is a private neighborhood, and we have rules." Malik raised an eyebrow. "I live here." Barbara Whitman, the HOA president, scoffed. "No, you don't. I'd know if someone new moved in." Malik stayed calm, fishing into his pocket for his deed. "I bought this house last month. Just closed on it." Barbara snatched the paper, skimming it, her face twisting in frustration. "I don't care what this says. We have guidelines, and I have the right to enforce them. And I don't recall approving anyone like you in this community." Malik caught the meaning behind her words, but he refused to let her rattle him. He had every right to be there, and no bitter old woman with a power trip was going to take that away from him. The harassment started small, petty violation notices for imaginary infractions. His grass was half an inch too tall. His trash cans were visible from the street. Then came the fines, stacked so high that Malik knew Barbara was manufacturing problems. When he tried to fight back, she doubled down. Then came the threats. "If you don't comply, you'll be evicted," she said one day, a smug grin spreading across her face. "This community has standards." Malik's patience ran thin. He reached out to an attorney, but before he could take action, something even more ridiculous happened. A formal eviction notice landed in his mailbox. It was fake, a sloppy forgery filed by the HOA itself. That was the final straw. Malik decided it was time to fight back. He went to the county records office, digging into property histories. What he found made him laugh. The house Barbara Whitman lived in had been foreclosed on months ago. The new owner, Malik Patterson. Barbara Whitman had spent weeks trying to evict the very man who now owned the roof over her head. That evening, Malik knocked on her door. Barbara answered with her usual scowl. "What do you want?" "You," Malik said, handing her an envelope, "are trespassing." Her face paled. She ripped open the letter and gasped. This is a mistake." "No mistake," Malik said, arms crossed. "See, while you were busy trying to push me out, you failed to pay attention to your own home. The bank took it, and guess who bought it?" Barbara stumbled back. No, this isn't happening." "Oh, it is. And since you've been so strict about HOA rules, I'm giving you a week to vacate." The news spread fast. The woman who once ruled the HOA with an iron fist was now facing eviction herself. The same neighbors she once controlled now whispered about her downfall. Some even laughed. Barbara tried to fight it, but the paperwork was solid. There was no loophole, no special treatment. Malik followed every legal step, ensuring that justice was served. A week later, she stood on her front lawn with her belongings in suitcases, defeated and humiliated. Malik watched from his porch, the same smirk she had once worn now mirrored on his face. Barbara Whitman had spent years abusing her power. Now, she had none. In Malik, he finally had the peace he deserved. As Barbara Whitman stood in disbelief, clutching the eviction notice, her world unraveled around her. The smug confidence she once carried had vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Her hands trembled as she read the documents over and over, as if willing the words to change. "This is some kind of joke," she sputtered, her voice shaking. "You can't just take my house." Malik folded his arms, unbothered by her desperation. "I didn't take anything, Barbara. You lost it. The bank foreclosed, and I legally bought it. Just like I legally own the home you tried to force me out of." Barbara's face twisted in anger. "This isn't fair. I've lived here for years. I built this neighborhood. You built a nightmare," Malik corrected. "You use the HOA as your personal kingdom, bullying people, fining them for no reason, making their lives miserable. And now, karma finally showed up. Neighbors started gathering, whispering among themselves. Word had spread like wildfire. Some of them had suffered under Barbara's reign, receiving fines for the most ridiculous infractions, mailboxes being the wrong shade of beige, flower pots, out of alignment, porch lights that were too bright. Now, they stood in the shadows, watching the tyrant fall. "You can't do this," Barbara shrieked. "I'll take this to court." Malik shrugged. "Go ahead, I have a team of lawyers ready. But before you waste your last few dollars, let me remind you, there's nothing to fight. The bank already made their decision. This is my house now, Barbara. And according to the rules you love so much, trespassers will be removed. Barbara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around as if searching for someone to rescue her, but the neighborhood was silent. No one stepped forward. Defeated, she stormed back inside, slamming the door. For the next week, the once proud HOA president fought desperately to find a way out. She called every connection she had, but no one was willing to help. The lawyers refused to take her case. The HOA board, terrified of their own liability, washed their hands of her. By the time moving day arrived, Barbara was a shell of her former self. Her expensive furniture sat on the curb, piled haphazardly. Her clothes, once neatly stored in a pristine walk-in closet, were stuffed into old suitcases. She stood outside, looking lost, as the moving truck idled beside her. Malik stepped out onto his porch, watching the scene unfold with a quiet satisfaction. Barbara's gaze darted to him, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You won't last here," she said bitterly. "This community doesn't want you." Malik smirked. "Funny, I own more property here than you do." Barbara's face turned red, but she had nothing left to say. With one final glare, she climbed into her car and drove off, her reign of terror finally over. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The HOA board quickly distanced itself from Barbara's policies, rewriting rules to be more reasonable. Malik, now seen as both a hero and a legend, settled into his home peacefully. As for Barbara, she disappeared from the neighborhood, her name becoming nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among new homeowners. In Malik, he finally got to enjoy the home he worked so hard for, without anyone trying to push him out. Days passed, and the once feared HOA president was nothing more than a bad memory. The neighborhood adjusted quickly to life without Barbara Whitman's oppressive rule. Homeowners who had been too afraid to decorate their porches, plant new flowers, or even park in their own driveways finally felt free. Malik watched with quiet amusement as the same neighbors who once turned a blind eye to Barbara's antics now greeted him warmly. People who had barely acknowledged him before now stopped to chat, thanking him for standing up to her. Some even shared their own horror stories, absurd fines, threats of legal action, and the suffocating grip Barbara had held over them for years. One evening, as Malik sat on his porch enjoying a glass of whiskey, a hesitant knock came at his door. He opened it to find an older man, Tom Reynolds, the HOA treasurer, standing with an embarrassed look on his face. "Mr. Patterson," Tom started, clearing his throat. "I just wanted to say, I should have spoken up sooner." Malik leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Yeah, and why didn't you?" Tom sighed, glancing down at his feet. "Barbara had a way of making people's lives hell. If you crossed her, she'd find a way to come after you. I wanted to fight back, but I was scared." He looked up, his face filled with regret. "You weren't. You did what none of us had the guts to do." Malik studied him for a moment, then finally nodded. "Better late than never, I guess." Tom exhaled in relief. "The board is holding a meeting next week. We're making some big changes, getting rid of a lot of Barbara's ridiculous rules. I'd love for you to come. Maybe even have a say in how things move forward." Malik smirked. "So, you're telling me the HOA wants my opinion now?" Tom chuckled awkwardly. "Let's just say, we learned our lesson." Malik thought about it for a moment. He had never wanted to be involved in neighborhood politics, but after everything he had been through, he realized something: he didn't just fight back for himself. He fought for every homeowner who had suffered under Barbara's control. "All right," he said, shaking Tom's hand. "I'll be there." Tom nodded, relief washing over his face. Looking forward to it. As Tom walked away, Malik leaned against his porch railing, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The battle was over, but the victory was more than just a personal one. He had changed something. He had taken back what was his, not just his home, but his peace. And as for Barbara Whitman, no one in the neighborhood ever saw her again. Some said she moved to a rundown apartment in the next town over. Others claimed she tried to join another HOA board, only to be laughed out of the meeting. Whatever happened to her, one thing was clear: her reign of terror was over. In Malik Patterson, he was finally home. Months passed, and the neighborhood transformed into a place of genuine peace. The suffocating grip of Barbara Whitman's rule had been lifted, and homeowners finally felt like they could breathe. The HOA, once a tool of oppression, was now focused on fairness. Malik had even been invited to join the board, not as a puppet like the others had been under Barbara, but as someone who could keep things balanced. He had no interest in controlling anyone's life. He just wanted to make sure that what happened to him, what happened to so many others, never happened again. One evening, as Malik sat on his porch, sipping a cold drink and watching the sunset, a familiar face appeared at the end of the street. Barbara Whitman. She wasn't the same woman who had once marched through the neighborhood with arrogance and authority. She looked thinner, her once meticulously styled hair now dull and lifeless. She wore plain clothes instead of the designer outfits she had once flaunted. She clutched a small handbag, her eyes darting nervously toward Malik's house. He watched as she hesitated, then, with clear reluctance, started walking up his driveway. Malik didn't move, he simply waited. Barbara stopped a few feet away, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't looking down on him. She wasn't issuing demands. She wasn't barking orders. She was just standing there. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I lost everything." Her voice was hollow. "My house, my savings, my reputation, everything." Malik didn't respond. He let her talk. "I've been staying in a small apartment," she continued, staring at the ground, barely scraping by. "No one in this town will give me a job. Even the people I used to call friends won't speak to me." Another silence stretched between them. She took a shaky breath. "I came here to say, I was wrong." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Wrong about what?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She clearly didn't want to say it, but she forced the words out anyway. "About you. About everything." She swallowed hard. "I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment. I thought I was protecting this neighborhood, but I was just protecting my own power. And it cost me everything." Malik studied her carefully. He had spent months fighting against this woman. She had made his life hell. And now, she stood before him, broken. He could have humiliated her. He could have laughed in her face. He could have reminded her of every cruel thing she had done. But he didn't. Instead, he let out a slow breath. "So what do you want, Barbara?" Her eyes flickered with something, hope, maybe. "I don't know. I guess, I just wanted to say it out loud. To take responsibility, for once." Malik nodded. He didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't invite her inside. He didn't tell her that everything would be okay. But he did say one thing. "Good luck, Barbara." She seemed to understand that was all she was going to get. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the street. Malik watched her go. Then, with a quiet sigh, he leaned back in his chair, took another sip of his drink, and smiled. Justice had already been served. And now, finally, it was time to enjoy his home.